Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another dispatch. I thought I would read a few essays from women artists, the Linda Nochlin Reader, edited by Mara Riley. I read some time ago her essay on Mary Cassatt that is just spectacularly good. And there's a few in here now that I'd like to share as well. Uh, it's a little funny for me. I'm a, I mean, well, a lot of the issues that she's talking about are really describing women's issues, feminist issues, looking at Joan Mitchell, etc. Well, that's what we're going to look at now. I want to look at Joan Mitchell, but I'm a guy, but I'm the guy reading this. So anyway, I'm just saying it. I don't know what else to say. Okay. It'll probably be 2 sessions to read this essay on Joan Mitchell from 2002, A Rage to Paint, Joan Mitchell and the Issue of Femininity. All right, so we'll start in. And sound is happening. Great. Okay. Rage, violence, and anger have often been deployed as heuristic keys in interpreting the work of Joan Mitchell, especially the early work. In her catalog of a major 1988 retrospective of Mitchell's work, Judith Bernstock tied Mitchell's 1957 painting To the Harbor Master to the Frank O'Hara poem from which Mitchell derived her title by referring explicitly to the lines in which water appears as the traditional symbol of chaos, creation, and destruction. Taking account of Gaston Bachelard's theory that, quote, violent water traditionally appears as male and malevolent and is given the psychological features of anger in poetry, unquote. Bernstock went on to maintain that both Mitchell's, quote, frenzied painting and O'Hara's poem, quote, evoke a fearful water with invincible form, metallic coils and terrible channels, and voice-like anger, a destructive force threatening internal and external chaos. She concluded with a reference to the formal elements in the painting that evoke the menacing mood of the poem, the cacophonous frenzy of short, crisscrossing strokes of intense color, the agitation heightened as lyrical arm-long sweeps across the top of the canvas, pressed down forcefully, even oppressively, on the ceaseless turbulence below. Of Rock Bottom, a work of 1960 to 1961, Mitchell herself maintained, it's a very violent painting. And you might say, sea, rocks. Of the whole group of canvases created from 1960 to 1962, including Flying Dutchman, plus names, French, sorry, Fremicore, and Couscous, the artist asserted these are very violent and angry paintings, adding that by 1964 she was trying to get out of a violent phase and into something else. This something else was a series of somber paintings Mitchell created in 1964, works that she called my black paintings, although there's no black in any of them. In their thick, plotted paint application and somber pigmentation, they constitute a break from the intensely colored, energetic, all-over style of her earlier production. They also seem to mark an end to the self-styled, quote, violent phase of Mitchell's work, and a transition to a different sort of expressive abstraction. Issues of intentionality aside, what do we mean when we say that violence, rage, or anger, indeed any human emotion, are inscribed in a work of art? How do such emotions get into the work? How are they to be interpreted? In earlier work, in earlier art, when anger or violence is the actual subject of the work itself, as for example in Antonio Canova's Hercules and Lyca, 1795 to 1815. Really? 20 years? The task of interpretation may seem easier, the emotion itself unambiguously present, even transparent, despite the smooth surfaces and neoclassical grandeur of Canova's sculpture. Yet even here, in Hercules and Lyca, with its furious hero and horrified victim, or in the convulsive image of hands-on murder in Paul Cézanne's Strangled Woman, 1870 to 1872, problems of interpretation arise. Is Cézanne's painting a more effective representation of rage than Canova's sculpture simply because we can read a coded message of violence directly from the formal structure of the work? From its exaggerated diagonal composition, its agitated brushwork, its distorted style of figuration? Clearly, the problem of just what constitutes and hence is read as rage or any specific emotion in art becomes both more and less complicated when the painting is abstract. That is to say, when there is no explicit subject to provide a basis for interpretation. In the case of abstract expressionist work like Mitchell's, even the titles may prove to be deceptive or irrelevant, appended, for the most part, after the fact. The task of interpretation is both exhilarating and daunting. The canvases functioning as so many giant Rorschach tests with ontological or, at the very least, epistemological pretensions. Biography, in fact, often looms large in such cases precisely because of the absence of recognizable subject matter. The gesture seems to constitute a direct link to the psyche of the artist, without even an apple or a jug to mediate the emotional velocity of the feeling in question. Yet, despite the unreliability of biography as a means to elucidate the work of art, it cannot be altogether avoided, although it certainly must be severed from the naive notion of direct causality. For example, Mitchell was sad because of the death of her father, so she made dark paintings. The role of rage in the psychic makeup of the artist and her production is daunting. The role of rage in the psychic makeup of the artist and her production is daunting. Anger may be repressed. It may be expressed in a variety of ways. It may even be transformed into its opposite, into a pictorial construction that suggests to the viewer a sense of calm, joy, or elegance. In any case, its role is always mediated. Following the general issues of rage and its expression in abstract painting is the more specific issue of gendered rage. For Mitchell, of course, was a woman abstract painter, even though, quite understandably, she did not want to be thought of as such when she painted the works under discussion. Indeed, there is an apposite story about Mitchell told by Elaine de Kooning in 1971 involving the phrase women artists. I was talking to Joan Mitchell at a party 10 years ago when a man came up to us and said, "What do you women artists think?" Joan grabbed my arm and said, "Elaine, let's get the hell out of here." Mitchell was fleeing from what, at the time, was a demeaning categorization. Like other ambitious young abstractionists in the 1950s and 60s who happened to be women, she wanted to be thought of as one of the boys, at least as far as her work was concerned. If she did not want to be categorized as a woman painter, it was because she wanted to be a real painter. And at that time, a real abstract painter was someone with balls and guts. Mitchell was one of many women trying to make it in a man's world and on men's terms. Even if they were not acknowledged as doing so, these women included painters, writers, musicians, and academics. It seems to me then important to examine and not merely how rage might be said to get into painting or sculpture, but also how it gets into women. In order to do so, it is helpful to consider the more general conditions existing for the production and valuing of women's work in the 1950s and 60s. Here, I think it is instructive to look again at two photographs that have often been compared, and then at a third. The first is the famous Hans Nemeth photograph of Jackson Pollock caught in the dance-like throes of sublime inspiration. It is a dynamic icon of the transcendent authority of, parentheses, male abstract expressionist creation. The second image, by Cecil Beaton, has been used to stand for, to put it bluntly, the corruption of the ideal. In it, a beautiful Vogue model stands before a Pollock painting testifying to the transformation, inevitable in late capitalist society, of creative authenticity, which is a momentary illusion at best into a saleable commodity. I'll put both photographs in the Substack letter I send out, and the third that she mentions as well, and some other work by Joan Mitchell. I'll put a bunch of images. Okay, we'll do it. Okay. As is usual in such visual demonstrations of social corruption, one thinks here of George Gross's or Otto Dix's trenchant satires of Weimar society, or later those of R.B. Kitaj. It is played out on or with the bodies of women, inert, passive, lavishly bedecked, sometimes nude or semi-nude. In Beaton's photograph, the model functions as a fashionable femme fatale, embodying, so to speak, the inevitable fate of modernist subversion, the relegation of high art to the subordinate role of mere backdrop for shutter feminine fashion, with fashion itself functioning as the easy-to-grasp sign of the fleeting and the fickle, high art's deplorable other. Beaton's fashion photograph transformed Pollock's painting into apocalyptic wallpaper, to borrow Harold Rosenberg's term, though in this case the wallpaper is not so much apocalyptic as merely pricey. This comparison and its implication make me angry and uneasy, because it is hard to side with either of these visions of art or fashion. My anger and my uneasiness, and this is Lyndon Nochlin, have to do with the fact that although I was involved in contemporary art in 1951, I was a young woman who was highly invested in fashion as well. And for me, in my early 20s, only a few years younger than Joan Mitchell, a struggling instructor, a graduate student, and a faculty wife at Vassar, being fashionable was one of the things that helped me and my young contemporaries to mark our difference from the women around us in the early 1950s. Being elegant, caring about clothes, constituted a form of opposition to what I called little brown Wrenism, disease imported from Harvard by Vassar faculty wives and their spouses, along with the post-war revival of Kinderküche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church, which were slogans from Germany, Nazi Germany, for women under fascism. What their role was. Children, kitchen, church. It was premised on a womanly, wifely, properly subordinate look. No makeup, shapeless tweeds, dun-colored twin sets, and sensible shoes. Brilliance and ambition had to be marked as different. There were several possibilities for artists like Joan Mitchell or Grace Hardigan. Paint-stained jeans and a black turtleneck could be professional attire and constitute an assertion of difference at the same time. The philosopher Elizabeth Anscombe, a strong-minded British eccentric, insisted on complete menswear, jacket, tie, trousers, and shirt. I am told that a special podium, which hid the offending pants, had to be rigged up when she lectured at Barnard College. As a woman who followed fashion, I could have told you who the model was in that beaten photograph, just as easily as I could identify Pollock. And I could have told you who had designed the splendid gown she wore. My grandmother had given me a subscription to Vogue when I was still in high school, and I followed fashion, as I followed art, avidly. I certainly knew they were not the same thing, but my passionate involvement with both art and fashion, and I might add, anti-McCarthy politics, made the fact that I was a woman, not a man, and a woman who thought of herself as different from many of the women around her, a vital differential in my relation to the elements of the Beaton versus Nemeth opposition. What then are we to make of the 1957 Rudy Burkhart photograph of Joan Mitchell at work in front of her painting Bridge? It's here, and I'll put it in to the email. Where should it be placed? In the camp of the original authentic creator, like the Pollock photograph? Or in that of the Beaton model? The sitter here is, after all, like the model, an attractive, slender, young woman. I do not know whether Mitchell ever saw the Vogue photo, and she was certainly not interested in fashion. But the oppositions offered by the two images were certainly part of the context within which she lived and worked. Maybe I should pause. I'm going to read about 2/3 more of a page. I think we've got a place to stop. And then she starts talking more about Mitchell's work too. Or is that a little? Yes. Okay, a little more. Different though they may be as visual objects, the position of the model in the Vogue picture is not so different from that of the figure in Willem de Kooning's Woman 1, 1950-1952. Both Beaton's photograph and de Kooning's painting implied that woman's place was as the object of the image rather than the creator of it. Her passion was not the rage to paint, but rather to be all the rage. The Burkhart photo of Mitchell, then, is something of an anomaly, the object taking over the subject position, albeit with a difference, and this despite the fact that Mitchell's body, qua body, is an athletic, dynamic, active one, and this despite the fact that Mitchell's, as active in the picture-making process as Pollock's. Yet in terms of the Nemeth and Beaton photographs, she is twice othered. Once as the female other of the male Jackson Pollock, but once again as the female other of the elegant and proper female Vogue fashion model. In other photos taken in front of her work, Mitchell is made to seem less self-assured, less like one of the boys. But there is one photograph taken in about 1953 of her with her poodle, George, that brings to mind one of the most famous youthful self-images of the artist as a young subversive. Gustave Courbet's Self-Portrait with a Black Dog of 1842. In the photograph of Mitchell and her dog, although she is clearly the other of Courbet in terms of gender, she may now be seen as same in terms of the chosen elements of the artist's self-representation. Like Courbet, she possesses her work and her dog. Mitchell's otherness in the photograph swerves back in this trajectory to identity. Her rage is transformed into mastery. Envisioned as a positive vector in the process of creation. For a photographic instant, at least, Mitchell is one of the boys. Indeed, a very big boy, Courbet. And yet this is not a completely satisfying resolution to the dilemma of the woman artist. We do not see the brush in Mitchell's hand, after all, as we do in Courbet's in the center of the painter's studio, 1854, 1855. And as we all know from simplified versions of Freud, if not from various artists and art critics, that the brush is the phallic symbol par excellence. Artists have been said to paint with their pricks, and how can a woman do that? As Michael Leja has succinctly put it, a dame with an abstract expressionist brush is no less a misfit than a noir heroine with a rod. Rod, I believe, here is a gun. What a wholesome emotion rage is, or can be. Then she quotes something in Latin, which translates as, "Sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles." The Iliad starts on a high note of rage, connecting art itself, the singing of the goddess, with heroic anger. All right, I'm gonna pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're about halfway through. All right, I'm gonna pause. Is that right? Yeah, about halfway through. Okay. She starts talking about her work. Okay. I'm gonna include the photos, some work in the email. Hope you're all well and staying cool, making stuff, keeping your balance. Take care, everybody. Be well. Bye.